Hi everyone, welcome back to Blurred Box. I'm Chloe.
I'm Haven.
I'm Pooja.
And Sophie is a bit occupied this episode, so she won't be able to join us. This is our podcast where 4 online students in 4 different places around the world from Stanford University's online high school come together every week to discuss a variety of topics and invite guests to take part in our discussions and share their views. Today, we are joined by one of our college counselors in our school, Dr. Adam Lips.
Hello.
Hi. Just please introduce and give a few words about yourself.
Sure. I'm Adam Lips. I am the director of College Counselling at Stanford's online high school. I have been at that school for 9 years now. Prior to working at the online high school, I worked in college admissions at 2 different institutions, Loyola University in Chicago and Emory University in Atlanta. After I did that, I did some doctoral work in higher education management where I studied student admission and financial aid policy. So that was the focus of my research. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Would you be able to tell us how you got into OHS exactly?
Yeah, sure. I had finished my doctoral program and, like I said previously, had worked in college admissions. And I was a stay-at-home parent. So we had moved to California with my wife and my daughter. I was taking care of my daughter. My wife was working. And I wanted to get back into the workforce. I really enjoyed my work in admissions. But I needed to be doing something that had a little bit less travel and a little bit more flexibility. I saw this came up at Stanford and it was a great option, because it fit all of those different things that I had done. And it was new, different, and interesting. So I thought I'd go with it.
Yeah, really cool. So Dr. Lips, our topic for today is on affirmative action in higher education. Would you be able to give us some insight as to what that means to you with the system in the U.S.?
Sure. I mean, I think affirmative action just basically is a group of, policies or any policy or program where an institution sort of actively makes efforts to improve opportunities for groups that are historically excluded in American society. I mean, where it touches upon what I do quite a bit is in college admissions, where it tends to be part of the potentially part of the review process. It's been subject to some litigation and court cases over the years as well. So I think that there are many reasons why colleges, endeavor to implement affirmative action policies and have a diverse student body is sort of what they're going for. So that's kind of where I see it most in what I do.
Right. And what do you think about it? Are there ways to improve it, or should it be improved? Is that even possible? I guess that's just kind of starter questions that I have from your particular expertise.
A one-size-fits-all policy, or
exactly.
You can kind of have variations on it that might suit schools differently?
I don't think there's necessarily one size fits all, so to speak, and I think that every institution is so different. I mean, we have colleges and universities that are public, and those that are private, those that are small, those that are large, those that serve different populations of people. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really something that needs to be tailored and, tweaked to fit each individual thing. Like my personal view on it is that affirmative action is something that is important. I mean, there are historically, there are groups that have historically been discriminated against and who are underrepresented in higher education. So higher education doesn't always look like the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. I think that there are a number of reasons for that. And I think that universities and colleges have a responsibility, in my mind, to be proactive about, promoting things like social mobility. And to take steps toward making things more equitable, so I think that it's something, that is overall a good thing. I don't know that the implementation always works all that well as it should. And I'm sure we can talk about that a little bit, but
right. So do you think that affirmative action is almost a policy that ideally would phase itself out over time, where it's no longer necessary, or if there will always be, different groups that kind of need a leg up into college admissions?
Sure. I mean, I think ideally it would somehow, I guess, go away. Do I see that happening in my lifetime? I'm not so sure. I
Right.
mean, I think that there's just such a long history of I mean, if you think about, not to go into too much and get too boring, but if you think about how colleges and universities came to be, say, and I'm talking about in this country particularly,
Right. Mm-hmm.
you know, that they were ways to like educate the children of wealthy landowners, always white, you know, and like that's how they started, and that's how they existed for many, many years. It's difficult to see, you know, people not proactively doing things to bring things, I think, more into balance. And I do think it, again, I would argue that it is beneficial to society as a whole for that to be a policy. You know, so you can see where I come out on this, like, you know,
Yeah.
philosophically
Yeah.
or yeah.
There's so many students that you've worked with in the college admission so far with all of us and students with the OHS, and you've seen them go from the beginning of the tunnel through the end of it and through the end of their journey. How have you seen that been implemented into their journey so far, the ones that you've been able to experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say, but I think that if I think about where our students apply, and they tend to apply to places that are more selective, so places that have many more qualified applicants than they have room in their freshman class to take. I think that students are reviewed in this way, this holistic way, you know, where we use the phrase holistic admission, where they're looking not just at what they've done academically and those things, but they're looking at, you know, as we say, a variety of factors. That adds uncertainty to the policy to the process for each individual student. And so I think that uncertainty can be a little bit unnerving for people, because we want it, or many people want it in some way to be a meritocracy,
Mm-hmm.
like a true meritocracy where there's a defined level of achievement, and then students who hit the certain levels of achievement are granted admission.
Right.
But that's not the case. The admission in the US is not a meritocracy at all. So I think that is something that students deal with, you know, sort of on a daily basis. And you know, and this may be part of that, but we'd never know specifically, you know, how much
Yeah.
a specific affirmative action policy playing in the thing.
I think the point of view that the meritocracy itself doesn't even exist within the college applications process is interesting, because I think that would upset a lot of people, you know, who really want to feel, you know, like they've earned their spot based on nothing more than like what they've earned and everything like that. But I think that we definitely saw, even most recently with the college scandals regarding like paying for admission to a lot of different colleges, I think that kind of opened a lot of people's eyes to the fact that this is, at the end of the day, like, colleges are still businesses, and they also still have incentives to have people who have the most money to come in for, you know, to admit people who they think can be donors to them in the future. So it's interesting to see that kind of become more realized, I think.
I was just wondering, going off of that, if you think there's a line between choosing an applicant who's in a minority versus someone who's not in a minority, or if you think there is some sort of defining factor where how do colleges choose between someone who is in a non-minority applicant versus someone who is a minority applicant?
I mean, I think it's tough to quantify, and I think that colleges deliberately will not quantify that. So, I mean, if you look at some of these like past court cases, the University of Michigan one is like early 2000, I think 2003 or something like that, is an interesting one to look at, because they were quantifying this. So they were saying if you were a student of a certain background, you get, they said, like 20 points. So they had a point system when they admitted people. So just by virtue of being a certain race or background, you get a certain number of points in the admission process. And then students who earn X points like are admitted, and those who don't are not. I mean, I think that kind of thing is problematic. And I don't think that that's something that colleges are doing or or want to do. So it's a lot more sort of subjective, and it's thinking about, well, what's your background been? What's your experience been? And how does that contribute to our college and our environment? And so there's a lot of uncertainty and then some interpretation that goes on there. And that's how we're seeing it used. And that's why it's a little bit, like fuzzy as to what role it's playing.
Yeah.
Right.
I've always found it interesting. I thought it must be one of the hardest jobs of college admissions officers to kind of analyze where the lack of opportunity might have come in for students, for, two students who are perfectly well qualified, but one has, gone to more summer programs or had more like academic opportunities given to them, and trying to weigh, where a student has just not taken advantage of opportunities given to them, or where they've actually been placed in a situation where they aren't offered to them, or are actively discouraged from achieving them. So I don't know if you struggled with that as an admissions officer during your time there, or if, I doubt there's any trick to just be able to solve that. But how did you kind of think through that?
Yeah, it's something that we were always really attuned to. We're always looking at, I think the job as an admission person is to be a positive, to think about things positively and try to like affirm decisions that people have made and to understand context. So giving the benefit of the doubt in situations, especially where a student didn't have the type of opportunity that other students might have, is something that we would think of. And again, it was never done though in like a systematic, formulaic sort of way. But it's always more like, hey, look at this student. Like, sure, they don't have any, say, AP courses, but look at their high school. 15% of the students go to 4-year colleges. They only offer one AP course. Their average test score coming out of the high school is extremely low. It's like mostly first generation students. It's, so now you're building some context for the place from which that student is coming. And then you may want to, provide them, more support for their candidacy given their situation. And that's all part of it. And then for each individual student.
It seems like a lot of it comes down to opportunity and who's going to be able to take the opportunity that's given to them. Is that correct? Like when it comes down to deciding who to admit into colleges, who's going to take advantage of the opportunity regardless of where they've come from or what their background is?
I think that's what they try to do. Yeah. I think that looking at what's available, so it's each individual case. What's been available to you? What's your individual situation? How have you, taken advantage, as you said, of what's available to you? And then, and then again, like baseline, do you have the ability to be successful in this environment being that of the college?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, the whole college preparedness thing. But what I'm really curious and interested about is that with this affirmative action thing, right, with the US, it's mainly based on ethnicity, right? That's kind of like the short term, put in simple words kind of thing. But when you look at it from like a very surface level, right, when you look at all the admissions that go into like Harvard, for example, just to very put it out there, Ivy League, you assume everyone going there applying is like very smart, like 5.0 GPA, if not more. And well, it's 4.0 GPA.
Whatever you want,
isn't it?
5.0
I'm not going to
them.
college at this point. 4.0 GPA, 5.0. So yeah, like they have a 4.0 more GPA, and then all the APs, like you said, like they have test scores. They've probably like helped in the soup kitchen, and they're like Superman at that point. Maybe with all of those going in, right? Surface level, you're gonna choose a black Superman or a white Superman. I feel like it's very strange that thinking about it in that way when a lot of people just look at that particular topic on its own, like just for conversation wise, what do you think, with having been in admissions, right? What is it that goes on there that when people think of it as service level, how do you clarify that to them? Just taking race on its own or ethnicity?
Right, it feels like a quota.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think quotas are it's kind of a dirty word, you know. It's no one will ever talk about or say that they have quotas, because I mean, in many cases they can be illegal, and in other cases, you know, it's again, it's not something you quantify. I mean, the example you gave is a little bit probably simplified, you know, oversimplified. I would think so. You know, but I think that maybe maybe to that point, the colleges, again, they're striving for this idea of diversity.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are reasons why they want it. And so they may find themselves in situations where, you know, maybe a student has like every advantage, you know, known to a person, but they come from an underrepresented group, but they may still admit that student, you know, in part, that like dimension of their application may be helpful to them. In the process, you know, because they're also looking at, you know, they're reporting numbers and those kind of things. But I mean, I don't think it's only, you know, it's not only a racial ethnic thing. I think that when we talk about underrepresented groups, you know, that can be people from first generation college backgrounds or lower income backgrounds. It could be, you know, nursing students for a place that has a shortage of nurses. You know, there are all types of ways that you can define underrepresented groups, and I think that that's what the policies are there for. I'm not really sure that I answered your question, but
No worries. I'm glad that's cleared up, because that's a very good distinction to make. But now I think this is where it gets interesting, because we're going to open this discussion to what it's like for other countries as well. France, for example, is particularly different. We're talking about this very, like you said, put aside the diversity that American universities strive for, the ethnic origins or underrepresented minorities. Now, from a paper I read from Elise Langen on affirmative action in French education systems, the French education system was created to uphold Republican principles stemming from the revolution. Their constitution upholds equality before the law of all the citizens without any discrimination. So with less words, the French Republican model tries to have all French citizens, irrespective of their religion, their race, social standing, all of these factors, receive same education, be afforded same opportunities and rights. The interesting part is that their affirmative action is based on geography rather than all of the stuff we've been talking about so far. And that's by targeting working class and immigrant neighborhoods. So what do you think on that alone before we go further?
I mean, I don't think that's a part of that. I don't think is dissimilar, because when we talk about underrepresented, like under that underrepresented umbrella, you know, geography can be a part of that. Right. Like the neighborhood you come from, you know, either like your location generally, or the neighborhood you come from is, or even the school that you go to, you know, can all fit into underrepresentation.
Do you feel like within those groups of like underrepresented minorities being represented in colleges, do you feel like there are any groups that colleges might have more of an obligation to, or if it's all kind of the same? You know, obviously you're trying to afford everyone an equal chance, but do you feel like there are people who need like more of a hand getting there? Like if it's based on like geography or ethnic background or class or majors or anything like that? Like, is there one stumbling block that you think
like a particularly more deserving group, you know? Right. I mean, I probably want to stay away from that. I mean, I think but if we look historically at the country, you know, and the history of this country, I mean, I think that you will find along the way like systemic issues of, you know, things like racism and classism and that. And I think that that will probably guide things, but I also think that that's an institution by institution, type of decision.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Right. Also, the admissions process and just all the applicants applying to every college seem to be so much stronger than in previous years. And I'm wondering if affirmative action is playing a role in that, because maybe people who aren't in a minority feel like they have more of a responsibility to take more challenging classes and be involved in more extracurriculars to try to get some other edge above other applicants.
I mean, I think in the absence of a true meritocracy, people are looking for the actual quantifiable measures that will improve their position. So I believe that, and this is just a hypothesis, I guess, but I think that, so those things are what? Grades and test scores. It's like first on the academic level, and then the third thing is sort of the accumulation of accolades that with outside activities and that so yeah, I mean, I think that people do see what they can have maybe some control over, and then they focus on those, and that's why we've seen an increase in like overall in testing profiles and things at colleges and universities, because that's like what people feel like they can do and have some control over.
I wonder if that comes from the absence of the meritocracy, or if that also, I've always kind of just assumed that came from, I don't know, from, people making college more of like a norm and like the next step that you're supposed to take, right, after high school, or like that a college degree is basically, is turning into the same as like a high school diploma as far as being able to find employment afterwards and stuff. So I guess I kind of just thought that it was people starting to take college more seriously, but I hadn't considered it as, I guess, a result of people like stopping to believe in a meritocracy, so to speak. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think people, yes, they, like a high school diploma isn't what it used to be. A college degree probably isn't what it used to be. And then, and I think then there becomes a focus in some sort of hierarchy of colleges, which contributes to the competitiveness. And then like the colleges aren't innocent in any of this either. I mean, they have for years deliberately driven up their application numbers in order to appear more selective, to generate more applications, which gives them more money in the end. So there's that aspect of it. There's that aspect of it too. And so more people want, especially at selective places, more and more people want what they have or what they think they can get out of it. Which,
So one of the things that I'm still thinking about, we're obviously in an online school, so the first thing that comes to mind is where does online school fit into all of this?
I mean, that is a good question. I mean, I think that there are a lot of benefits. So I always look at it on the positive, right? I think there are a lot of benefits to being at the school. I think that like one primary difference is if you're looking at, if the admission office is looking at students from like, let's take like the high school down the street, Main Street Public High School, and kind of, there's differences within the high school, but everyone's kind of the same. Everyone lives in the same area. Not everyone, but many people come from the same like socioeconomic background, and their parents have, somewhat similar jobs, because it's all, regional like that. When you come to our high school, you're not from here necessarily. You might be from across the country or, halfway around the world.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that like and I often tell people like where you're from is like, to the extent that matters at a university, and it will matter differently to different ones, will play a role in like your admission. So you may be based on geography, underrepresented at some colleges, but overrepresented geographically at other colleges.
Okay, so basically you're saying like they do take these two factors into account then, right? So when they look at this or am I misinterpreting that? You look at the population of us, for example, right? I remember talking to you about this at some point, right? That, or maybe it was someone else, that they do register all of the students in our high school, for example, in the Bay Area. But like you said, it's not the case because there are people like me who are halfway across the world. What happens then?
So there's a person who's in charge of our high school, with the idea being that you're the expert on our high school and on our academic program. So this is part of the context, like you're coming out of this high school offers certain things, and then you've taken certain things, you know, that compare to what's offered. So that's part of the context. If you're somewhere else, we can't expect you to take multivariable calculus, you know, at the school down the street,
right,
because they don't have it, you know. So you're looked at, you know, sort of on the academics and the coursework that you've done, and the curriculum is meant to be understood by a person who's expert. And then what I'll tell you is where you're still considered by that college to be geographically from the place where you live. You know, so if you live in Iowa, you're an OHS student, you know, who has access to that academic program, who lives in Iowa. You're not a Bay Area student.
Yeah.
You know, in the same way, because, and that's important, and I think people have concerns about it, because where I live, like in this area, there are like tens of thousands of like wealthy,
It's competitive.
high test taking students who have accumulated like strong grades and you know, like tough coursework. It's like an embarrassment of riches from, you know, so it's more competitive to be an applicant from here.
I think it was interesting what you were saying about kind of looking at the opportunities that you're given and then comparatively like how you've taken advantage of them, like what you've taken, like that's actually been offered to you and stuff like that. Because I've spent a lot of my high school, I was homeschooled from second grade until honestly I only started really doing online school sophomore year of high school. So I spent a large majority of my life as a student at the homeschooler. And that definitely made me really nervous through the college application process, which thank God I'm done with now. But that made me nervous because I felt like the admissions officers didn't really have the same baseline of comparison that they have for a lot of other places, even like online schools. You know, like one of the reasons that I ended up attending Stanford OHS too is because it's a great school. We wanted to try something new, and also because we wanted to kind of try to give colleges an idea of the baseline that I was hitting as a homeschooler, or, you know, the kind of academics that I was trying to strive for. So I wonder if you encounter, I know that there are specific like homeschool admissions officers who I presume have more knowledge on like what it's generally like. But since that changes based on like each individual, do you have any experience with like how that might be evaluated, or where you create a baseline where it's really difficult to tell if there even is one?
I think that homeschool students commonly present a challenge for admission offices because just of what you're talking about, there's a lack of, you know, like a comparative standard. So the if you're traditionally homeschooled in the sense that my parents taught me, you know, all my classes, you know, it's not uncommon for a traditionally homeschooled student to present to an admission office with all A's, you know, in their classes. And so there's probably what I would say an over-reliance in those situations on standardized testing, because they need some sort of point of comparison.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, now they're going test optional with a lot of colleges with the current situation. Right.
Yes.
Right. They say test optional, but I feel like
so I'm curious as to what that implies to you. Like, you know, like I think Cornell recently said it too, and then was it I think Wellesley too? They're like, oh yeah, we're test off. Really? Are they?
Well, like, I would like to know what you think that means.
I feel like test optional, I see it and I think, of course, okay, it's test optional, like, you know, technically, but I feel like, I mean, especially with my background as a homeschooler, I don't know about you guys, but because I kind of recognize that they might need the standardized tests, even for the schools I was applying to the last cycle that were test optional, I was like, it's not really test optional for me because I kind of need to prove something further.
I think so too. Yeah. I'm still I go into it thinking as well, like, yeah, okay, you say test optional, but those who have the scores already, I mean, you put my profile next to the person who has a relatively competitive profile to mine, but has those scores, even though say like, yeah, you're understandable, you're human, thank you, please be nice. Look, I didn't get the opportunity to do it, but look at this person who has the 1600 SAT and the one that didn't get the opportunity to do it. You're going to pick that one, aren't you?
Yeah, because I feel like they would automatically look somewhat better because you don't have the same source of comparison. Like, even if the other person did take the SAT, at least there was some sort of comparison to compare them to versus someone who just didn't take it.
We're having kind of a similar issue, I think, right now. I say we as like the large we. At OHS, since the grades went pass-fail, or you have the option to kind of opt into your pass-fail grades, I think a lot of kids are considering now like how it looks on their transcript if they have pass-fail versus if they have like a 70 in their class, or like if they have a high grade, if that would look better. So they're trying to weigh like if colleges would actually look at them the same too.
Hence what we think on the, you know, test optional is like, no.
It's a little bitter.
I mean, sorry to come off that way, but no.
But I mean, and any admission person is welcome to disagree with me, but I mean, if you just think about it, for so long, especially these places that haven't historically been test optional, they've always relied on tests as one of the metrics that they're using. You know, so it's best to, you know, probably if you can have tests, you know, they're still going to rely on them and look at them. But I think that what they're saying by going test optional is they're recognizing. So again, when we get back to underrepresented groups and things like that, they're recognizing that like, hey, not everybody's going to be able to take tests, and you shouldn't be disqualified because you are not in a situation to take tests. Like, sure, maybe if you have the means and you've prepped and everything, you did that early in your junior year and you're all set and you're good to go. But what if you're not that? What if you're like from a place that typically can't take them until the fall, and then there are no tests in the fall, you know, and now you're not going to be able to do it. And so I think it's good to have it. Yeah.
I think that's quite interesting to talk about because obviously it's a big deal going on right now and it's affecting loads and loads of people. But one of the things that we also do on this podcast before we kind of wrap up is we have a box segment, and we kind of have this box where we ask our guests to classify words that fit inside a box and then outside of a box. So since we're talking about affirmative action, naturally, we've kind of talked about this, but what words would you consider that first come to mind? If you're having trouble with words, which we found, you can come up with phrases because, you know, single words are hard.
I have trouble with words, yeah.
I know, I got the feeling too. The inside the box, you talk about, I guess, affirmative action and the positive outcomes of that, and then the negative outcomes of that, and the outside of the box. Quite generic and simple, but let's see how that goes.
So inside the box first, the positive aspects of it? Yes. Yeah. Okay. I think diversity.
Right.
Equity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Social mobility. No, it's 2 words. You know, opportunity. I think, yeah. I think words that don't. Racist. I don't. Some people are reverse discrimination. I think are things I would not put in there.
Just to kind of like help you out, what are some words that maybe are misconstrued that people like tend to put in the wrong boxes, or words that don't even fit in there but people seem to use from your experience?
Well, I think this idea that these aren't words, it was the concept of I didn't get in. I didn't get in. to places because of this policy. Like
Right.
they only got
scapegoat
because of the policy.
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't, you know.
Right.
And then I
Right.
think that sometimes gets most focused on things like race. So so maybe they're looking at the student from the underrepresented racial group as why they didn't get in. But are they thinking about the legacy applicant, the donor, the athlete?
That's interesting.
You know,
Right.
the musician, all those kind of things. Like people don't seem to have an issue with as much of an issue with that, though I know this admission scandal like brings a little bit of more of that to light.
Yeah.
That's true.
The interesting to me is that when you bring that up, I know we're like almost at time, but in something I read for Brazil in 2012, they enacted a law that required the public universities to reserve half of their admission spots for largely poor students, and then drastically increased the number of students of African descent. And then because of this, it became like common to put yourself in front of like this panel, and if you self-identified as mixed race or Black, then they can kind of like judge your race, and then the panel asks like student questions and then takes measurements such as like their nose width and hair texture.
Wow.
Yeah.
To like determine whether they should be admitted.
Yeah, like in front of a panel to get
if they're
like,
telling the truth or something.
Yeah, like they'll take the measurements and stuff.
That's
like,
really problematic too, because I know for myself, I'm of Puerto Rican descent, and I identify that way. I identified that way on my college applications as Latina, but I'm white presenting. I don't speak Spanish at home, so you know, if you were to put me in front of a panel like that, I'm almost positive I wouldn't be able to pass, even though I claim that part of my heritage. So it's interesting.
Right.
Yeah, I forget where I was going with that, but that was just really interesting. I wanted to put out there. Or if you have any like thoughts on that, Dr. Lips. That's
I mean,
wow.
I don't really have thoughts on that. But you can also look, you know, for some ways, like ways that people have tried to do things alternatively. You can look at the state of Texas, you know, where they they grant, you know, I forget, maybe like top 10% admission to the state schools.
Yeah.
You know, so that the idea is that people are distributed in like different ways at different types of schools around the state. And so that might be one way to do it in the absence of considering race. They have something somewhat similar in California with the top 8%, and that, you know, but so that implies like, oh, maybe there's some fairness there, but then you have people who circumvent that, right? Like there was, I read about a school in Texas that found a way to consider the top 15% of their class as the top 10%. So maybe they like counted the ties differently, you know?
Wow.
And that of course was a well-resourced, already advantaged school, you know, so then there's that. So that's like, when you try to make things a meritocracy, you know, you also have to think about, well, what measures are we using to define merit? And are those fair? And I would argue, like in this country, the things that people want to use to define merit, grades, test scores, are inherently unfair to certain groups of people.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're going to like create a meritocracy on that, like that's flawed in and of itself. So
right. Even GPA comes to mind, because so many different schools have different ways of calculating GPA. But I know that now colleges recalculate them anyways.
Yeah, it's such a fake like metric. Like it's exists
putting
to, like,
it on a scale. Yeah.
And like appease parents and things like that. My views can be a little bit cynical sometimes about this stuff. So.
I think we've had some cynicism in this podcast, but
sorry.
No worries at all. We think we kind of strayed from that Bach segment, but it's all good.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. This was really great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
sure,
thank
no problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries. Before we let you go, though, I would like to ask one thing. If you had one piece of advice to give to all of the students registering for college now, with this current situation, not just the students in OHS, what would be the one thing you would say to all these students registering now?
Oh, registering to start college, or who are applying?
I'm using the wrong words. I'm having trouble applying towards. Sorry. Oh my God. I'm like off today. Applying to college.
I mean, applying to college, my main piece of advice is don't make the mistake of thinking that the outcome of your application process says anything about your like ability, potential, or self-value or self-worth. The process through which you have to go to, you know, to be admitted to college carries no meaning for you as a person. It's like, to simplify it, it's an asinine and like broken kind of process. And the fact that people, you know, put so much on them being either a success or a failure, for instance, to simplify it, on the outcome of that process is, having done that job and what I do now is so ridiculous and like disheartening to me. I would just encourage people to not do that. Like,
I love that.
Yeah, that's good advice.
You know, there are good things to do. So yeah, that's my advice. I always say it to people. Not everyone always listens, but I think that they get there eventually as they get a little older.
Everything works out in the end. Yeah.
All right. There's our positivity for the end.
Exactly.
Definitely.
We needed some of that. But yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Lips. This is really great.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you guys for listening to Blurred Box with Chloe, Haven, Pooja, and mine is Sophie today. She'll be back next week. If you like our show and want to know more, check us out on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or please leave us a review on iTunes. Be sure to join us next week for another episode of Blurred Box, and we release episodes every Saturday.
And if you enjoy listening to our podcast, you can follow us on Instagram or Twitter at BlurredBox for the latest updates.
All right, and that was it for today. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.